From the Gulf States Newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm sports and culture reporter Joseph King, chopping it up this week. We're hearing about some difficult news today. This past weekend, a historic synagogue in Jackson, Mississippi was set on fire. Surveillance cameras at Beth Israel congregation show a person pouring some sort of liquid around the building, and a 19-year-old has now confessed to starting the fire. Here to tell us more about what's going on in Jackson is Mississippi Public Broadcasting reporter Shamir Muhammad. Hey, Shamir.
Hey there.
Thanks for coming on. Now, this seems really serious. Could you explain a bit about exactly what happened here?
Yes, so there was a fire at Jackson, Mississippi's only synagogue, which fire investigators have determined to be the result of arson. And last week, there was a fire that brought the Jackson Fire Department to the Beth Israel congregation in the north of Jackson. And after the department put out the fire investigators determined that there was no heat source to indicate that the fire could have started by anything other than human involvement. I personally was covering the mass shooting that happened in Clay County that particular day. So I was alerted to the fire at Beth Israel the next morning when I saw that I had received statements from the mayor, and I was also contacted by someone from the Israeli consulate in Atlanta. So it was, from what I've heard, a pretty emotional weekend for different people that I spoke with in Mississippi.
Was anyone hurt from the fire, and how were the damages?
So according to an affidavit filed by the FBI, 19-year-old Stephen Spencer Pittman, that's the person being charged in the case. He was seriously burned on his ankles, hands, and face after catching himself on fire after pouring some type of accelerant in the lobby of the synagogue. There is video surveillance from Beth Israel showing a person wearing a hoodie pouring some sort of liquid around the lobby and that liquid splashing onto that person's clothing. And the damage was extensive. No part of the synagogue is able to be used. The library is destroyed. 2 Torahs were destroyed, and 5 others were damaged. The temple's tree of life was also destroyed. That is something that was used to keep track of really significant events in the congregants' lives. One historic Torah was left untouched by the fire.
And do you know what time all this happened?
The fire department arrived at Beth Israel at about a little after 3 in the morning of that incident.
And do you know how the other synagogues around Mississippi are reacting to all of this?
I believe that Zach Schimper, who is the president of the Beth Israel congregation, told me that there was some concern because of other anti-Semitic events that have happened both globally and nationally. The event that just happened in Australia, as well as the incident that happened at Governor Shapiro's residence in Pennsylvania. So there was some concern, but I have not heard directly from any other faith leaders around the state whether or not other synagogues have been concerned about needing to up security at their particular temples.
And what else have you heard about what happened in Mississippi?
Well, I just mentioned Zach Schimper. Here's a bit of tape from him talking about the situation and the arrest.
Honestly, before the authorities even came to do the investigation at our temple, I believe they already had the suspect in custody. And they already suspected this gentleman because he had posted anti-Semitic comments and such on social media.
Now, we know that the suspect confessed to his father and actually laughed as he described what he did. The affidavit shows a text message exchange that the FBI claims shows Pittman texting his father from outside the temple, and his father was apparently pleading with him to come home. And Pittman has been charged already in federal court for arson, and he's also facing a first-degree arson charge at the state level, and that carries with it a hate crime enhancement, which means that he could potentially face harsher penalties if it's determined that this was a crime committed because of someone's race or religion.
And this same synagogue has a history when it comes to attacks like this, right?
Yes, it does. And so Rabbi Perry Nussbaum, who was the rabbi at the Beth Israel Temple in the 1960s, he was an outspoken proponent of civil rights at that time. So the temple was firebombed by the Ku Klux Klan in 1967, and Nussbaum's home was also firebombed shortly after. I also spoke to a local reverend about how his church supported the temple at that time, and that there are still members who remember the firebombing of 1967.
Now, you mentioned this briefly earlier, and I wanted to come back to it. From this recent fire, you said a Torah survived the blaze almost untouched, right?
Yes, so miraculously, a Torah at the temple that actually survived the Holocaust was spared from the fire. It was being kept in a glass case, I believe in the library, and so it was not touched by the flames.
That is miraculous, to say the least. And I wonder if it offers some type of hope within the Jewish community here in Jackson.
I have seen a lot of emotional responses to this particular event. I can say anecdotally from people that I've talked to, it's raised some pretty important questions about the idea of anti-Semitism and other ways that this has impacted the greater community of Jackson and Mississippi.
So you said Beth Israel was the only synagogue in Jackson, right? Have you heard how the community is coping with all of this?
Yes, it is the only synagogue in Jackson, Mississippi. And I think for the community, from what Zach Schimper told me, he's heard from a lot of different churches and a lot of different faith leaders in the city who have offered up space for Beth Israel to continue to worship. And according to him, it's just a symbol that the Jewish community in Jackson has always been a part of the fabric of the city. And he said that he's heard nothing but support for this 165-year-old institution.
Shamira Muhammad is a reporter with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. Thanks again for keeping us up to date.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Last year was a tough one for food banks across the Gulf South, spurred by funding cuts and a 43-day government shutdown that left federal employees furloughed and food stamp programs suspended. Still, the organizations were able to meet the challenges head on. The latest feature from community engagement reporter Elise Gregg checks in with organizational leaders to discuss the lessons learned last year as another budget deadline draws near.
Last year, Mississippi Food Network distributed nearly 26 million pounds of food. But during a visit to the nonprofit's headquarters, the warehouse was pretty quiet, just a few folks organizing boxes. It definitely did not match the business of 2025.
So our pounds were down. We served about the same amount of people with a good bit of less food this year.
That's interim CEO Cassandra Mobley. She says last year's challenges included things like the immediate crisis of the shutdown, along with loss of federal funding, and even changes to food and funding they get from the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Some of the biggest challenges were just the changes administratively that had effects on how nonprofits in general do their work.
But Mobley prefers to frame all the issues of 2025 as opportunities for 2026. Even with the hardship of the last shutdown, she says they learned a lot that they can use if there's another at the end of this month.
That's one of the things we had to do was really pivot and be flexible and think about how to serve our community and serve our neighbors and have those impacts that we want to have.
With those federal funding cuts, state support has been crucial for organizations like Mississippi Food Network, and that became really evident during the last shutdown. In Alabama, the state released a total of roughly $5 million to mitigate the effects of the shutdown. Louisiana put together a system to fund SNAP for some residents as well. But in Mississippi, Governor Tate Reeves simply said there wasn't much he could do.
But what Mississippi's emergency statutes don't do is they don't allow me to just spend money, just appropriate money.
One organization that got a big picture view of that was Feeding the Gulf Coast, which serves Florida's panhandle as well as the coast along Alabama and Mississippi.
As a food bank that somewhat unique that exists across state lines. Our ability to serve these states can vary depending on the amount of support we get from each state.
That's their president and CEO, Michael Ledger. Aside from the chaos of the shutdown, he says that food insecurity is simply a persistent issue across the Gulf South.
These are areas regionally that have high rates of poverty, high rates of hunger, and unfortunately, relatively low rates of support systems. A lot of people that you wouldn't expect to be in the line, as I say, or needing food support are the folks that are doing everything right.
And he says that could be anyone, from a senior choosing between groceries and medicine, or a parent struggling to pay for childcare and get food on the table. But even with federal funding cuts and a shutdown, 2025 was actually a really productive year for them, Ledger says, setting a record by putting out about 45 million pounds of food.
I'm really proud of our team having been able to increase again this year, but I fear that 2026, that may be an insurmountable task, just given where we're heading with support levels.
Across food banks, addressing regional insecurity is a big focus for 2026, along with looking closely at specific local needs.
Oh, it's a huge priority, and that's one of the reasons why we put bricks and mortar in those areas. We thought it was really important to more effectively serve those areas.
That's John Sillers, Chief Strategy Officer of Second Harvest, which serves the southern part of Louisiana, from the Texas to the Mississippi borders. The brick and mortar he's talking about are a couple of new distribution centers in their area, which is something Mobley wants to set up in Mississippi, where their one network serves 56 counties. Other common goals include increasing donations of healthy food and fresh produce, sourcing food from local farmers, collaborating with other food banks, and finding new ways to meet communities where they're at. But ultimately, branching out in 2026 depends on maintaining those basic operations to cover food insecurity across the region.
Our food security went from, I think, more than 407,000 people last year to more than 436,000 people this year. I think that's driven in part by poverty, loss of jobs, slow growth.
And that means when there's a crisis, like another government shutdown, things go from bad to worse, oftentimes leaving food banks to clean up as much of the mess as possible.
We're hoping that people's memories aren't short, because with the government shutdown, if they turn off SNAP again, it's going to create more of a need.
Across all 3 states, that means not just helping local communities, but getting support from those communities and the states they're in return.
And now it's time for Gulf States Gems, our segment on the hidden gems of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. The Gulf States Newsroom's business manager, Andrea Miller, tells us what this week's gem is.
Gulf States Newsroom business manager Andrea Miller here. Last week, health reporter Drew Hawkins put out a call for the best places to get outside in the Gulf South. Thomasine Collins of Birmingham emailed us to share about the Wheeler Wildlife Refuge. She said, "I highly recommend a trip to the Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge in Alabama during the migratory season for sandhill and whooping cranes." And I agree, Thomasine. I highlighted Wheeler on our Instagram in July. I really love the glass-walled wildlife observation building that you can use to watch the cranes. It has a speaker recording the outside so you can hear the cranes inside. And I went on a rainy morning last year with my family, and it was so peaceful and beautiful. We would still love to hear your favorite places outdoors in the Gulf States. So you can email connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org.
This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Again, I'm your host, Joseph King. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to steer your route.